Welcome to Rumor versus Truth, your trusted source for facts, where we dissect the evidence behind risky rumors and reveal clinical truths. Today, we're looking at claims about dyes and meds to find out their true colors.
Hey, Steve, how you doing? Are you feeling blue?
I am, if you can see my tongue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
I've been
can.
having some
And
hard
everybody else can
candies.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've had some Blue Lake #1 candies here. They're delicious. And I'm honestly tickled pink by this topic. I'm Steve the pharmacist.
And I'm Don the pharmacist. And you'll hear buzz about adverse reactions to artificial dyes since the FDA announced its ban of the red dye number 3 due to showing cancer in rats. In this episode, we're giving claims about dyes and meds the red carpet treatments. And no promises, but we will try to keep the off-color puns to a minimum. Again, no promises.
No promises at all. And,
Yeah.
it's not just red dyes, Dawn. It's also affecting other dyes that the FDA is removing, like FD&C red number 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, and blue number 1. And actually, I found out those are all in the candies I'm eating right now.
Okay.
So that's concerning. But these are all going to be removed from the food supply by the end of next year. But it's important to think that this wasn't out of the blue necessarily. Questions have been building about dyes for a long time. And it seems like people are dying to know about the colors in their meds.
Well, we warned you, everybody, about the puns we're going to be doing. So,
So buckle up.
yeah.
And ironically, though, let's start out with meds that don't have color. The claim here is that white tablets or clear solutions and suspensions don't have dyes. But it's important to think here, just because a medication is white doesn't mean it doesn't have dyes, right? In fact, some white tablets I can think of contain yellow dye to sort of brighten them up. Some examples are cetirizine 10 milligram tabs,
Mhm.
or even oxycodone with acetaminophen. So thinking about that.
Right. So then I'm thinking, Steve, in looking at product labels and that kind of thing. What about those dye-free things that are, white or clear even?
Yeah, we use those a lot for kids in my practice being in pediatrics. I'm glad you brought that up because dye-free suspensions like ibuprofen, for example, don't have dyes, but they are indeed white. So sometimes they don't get to use a dye. Maybe they're using things like titanium dioxide or zinc oxide pigments to get that white color for a lot of meds. So based on this claim that white tablets or clear solutions don't have dyes, the verdict is rumor. It's important to not rely on product colors alone, as we saw. And you can look at the inactive ingredients or the package insert, or you can even call the manufacturer to really see what dyes these meds contain. That's really going to be your best source of truth.
Right. Yeah, I love that last point, Steve. Now that colorless meds are out of the way, let's get into dyes. And let's go and start with some of the news, our next claim. So the claim is actually recent FDA mandates to remove artificial dyes only affects food products.
Interesting.
So, thinking about the recent FDA announcement in April of 2025, it's managed to remove the 6 petrochemical-based dyes that you mentioned earlier
Yep.
from food and replacing those with natural dye alternatives. But that announcement actually didn't say anything about medications. So did some digging. The announcement actually back in January of 2025 had some different mentions in it. So they're removing the red dye number 3 from foods and medications.
Okay, so it's both for that one. But when I hear that, now I'm worried. So does that mean they need to submit a lengthy new drug approval from scratch to do this for each med just to change one dye?
Well, Steve, worry not. Changing or removing dyes in a med generally requires submission to FDA in the annual report. I mean, it does not require a formal drug application beforehand.
Okay, so it's kind of like an FYI. That's
Yeah.
good to know. So I'm guessing then they may substitute those dyes with natural coloring, but are there risks with those natural dyes?
See, that's the thing. The natural, as we all know, does not necessarily mean harmless, right? So need to stress
Right.
that. Also need to consider things like contaminants and unintended consequences of that as well.
Yeah, good point.
All right, so let's dive back into that claim, which is recent FDA mandates to remove artificial dyes only affect food products, and the verdict is true with conditions. There's not as much red tape as I thought for removing dyes.
Right. And it's also important here to think about flavorings and dyes in those. As a pharmacist, we get asked to add flavorings to medications all the time for pediatrics, and there are dyes in those too. So check that
Right,
labeling closely.
right. Very good point, Steve. Uh, honestly, so what's all the fuss? What are the problem with dyes? Really, to answer that, I recently spoke to our dye expert, Gina, who's a pharmacist and editor at Pharmacist Letter with TRC Healthcare, to provide some of that color commentary on one of those claims. Let's go ahead and take a look. Well, hey, Gina. How are you?
I am good. What about you?
I am good, and I'm much better now that you dress the part. So you have the
Thank
nice
you.
colors going on.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully, they will be less controversial than some of the red dyes that we talk about in this
Right,
show.
we'll see, right? You never
Yes.
know. Okay, so I thought you are the perfect person to strike the right tone with some of these claims. So let's get to it. You ready?
Thank you. Yes.
All right. So I have one for you, and it is some dyes have adverse effects. What do you
Mm,
think?
yeah. So red dye number 3 has actually been banned by the FDA because it is shown to cause cancer in rats. And right now, companies currently have until 2027 to remove red dye number 3 in foods and until 2028 for meds.
Mm,
So don't be shocked if you still find this dye listed in some ingredient labels for foods and meds in the next couple years.
mm,
And then another red dye, which is red dye 40, may contain benzidine, which is a known cancer causing substance. And you may have heard about red dye 40 because it is the one that people often talk about that can cause increased hyperactivity in kids.
yeah. Okay.
Mhm. Yes.
So it seems like you love to pick on red dye.
I
So I'm
do.
going to go ahead and ask you, uh, have you kind of seen the other colors that may have adverse effects?
Yeah, so technically, it's possible for patients to have adverse reactions to any type of dye, whether it's more of an allergic reaction or more of a severe reaction, such as
Mm,
trouble breathing. I have read reports of yellow dyes causing hives.
mm,
But really, if patients ask, why are dyes even in my food and in my meds,
mm,
what we can tell them is they're in there solely to make things pretty. They're in there to brighten up our food, brighten up our meds. They have
mhm.
no
Right.
nutritional or therapeutic value at all. So really taking them out is not a bad thing. It just is going to make your
Mhm.
food less visually appealing. Food and meds, I should
Correct.
say.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that last point up because, as of now, I'm hearing patients in the pharmacy asking, okay, why, dyes are the conversation of the day, right? And they're asking, okay,
Yes.
why are these dyes in there if they provide no value? So I'm glad
Right.
you got to that point. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Of
And thank
course.
you very much for joining us and solving that claim for us. And let's go and kick it back to Steve for his thoughts.
All right.
She had a lot of really good points there.
Mhm.
Something I really like that she mentioned, it really comes down to benefits versus risks, right? We know that it causes cancer in rats, maybe not confirmed in humans, but if they're just in there to make drugs and meds and food pretty, what's the point there? Those risks probably outweigh those benefits. So, really good
Yeah.
points there.
Yeah, the benefits really seem almost nil, right? When you can kind of put
Right.
everything into perspective. Correct. So, all right. So let's go ahead and go back to the claim. So it is certain dyes can cause adverse effects. The verdict is it is true. So some dyes have been shown to cause cancer in rats, and those have been potentially linked to other symptoms such as allergic reactions and hyperactivity.
And Don, I'm trying to think of what meds have that red dye number 3 in them. And ones that can kind of come to mind are like certain doxycycline capsules, omeprazole capsules, and even some amoxicillin suspensions for kids that I've dispensed has that in there probably, since
Yep.
we know a lot of the sort of fruity flavored ones have red dye in there to help with the look, so to speak. Even
Right.
though it comes as a white powder, definitely turns pink
Yeah.
once you mix it. So now that Gina mentioned that dyes are only there to make things pretty, and that's true, and there's no nutritional or therapeutic value, right? Is there more to that? And this leads us to our next claim that pill color or med color can impact patients' expectations about a medication's effects. And this is pretty interesting because now it kind of gets into the psychology behind all this. We've actually looked at medication colors in studies since the 1950s. And what's relatively consistent across multiple studies is that blue and white colored meds rank the highest for people thinking that they have a sedative or anti-anxiety effect. I can tell you the blue hard candies I'm eating don't have that effect, but some people it has that sort of placebo effect. Also, white colored pills are most associated with pain relief for some folks. Whereas, and this is interesting, yellow and red colored pills usually rank highest for things like hallucinatory effects. So, people tripping out on red colored pills. Although we know, for example, certain ibuprofen comes as red colored pills, and people are definitely not hallucinating on that. And what's interesting here is there can be a lot of cultural factors at play. For example, I found one study that compared responses to these medication colors in the United States versus
Ooh.
Kosovo, and there were different responses, right? However, USA respondents had similar answers to what the United Arab Emirates subjects had. So it kind of depends across international boundaries for some. And studies have shown that participants usually report these associations are based on sort of an emotional response or a symbol, or maybe they're thinking about past medications that had this effect and their brain kind of makes those connections psychologically. And being a pediatric pharmacist, we also have to think about the differences in age. They found that children actually prefer red colored meds and they actually rate white colored meds lower in terms of favorability. So who knows? Wonder what that kind of tells. I'm sure that plays into marketing for some meds, right?
Right.
So, with that, with this claim that pill color can impact patients' expectations about a medication's effects, the verdict is true, right? We've seen just now the visual appearance of meds is important, how we perceive them. And I think our psychology plays a pretty big role. And I have to ask you, Don, this is kind of a gross question, but what if I dispensed you a brown suspension to drink? What would you what would you think if you had a med that was that color?
It's honestly what comes to my head first is you pulled it out of a sewer. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you wouldn't
it's
want to
not
take it.
when I think appetizing liquids, brown does not come to mind.
And you know what? I bet drug
Yeah,
manufacturers definitely take that into
yeah,
account.
yeah.
And you know, it kind of makes you think too of like the methylene blue challenge. You've heard of this, right? It's kind of going around.
Yeah, go ahead and kind of explain that one
Yeah, I'll fill you in.
quickly.
So my understanding is that people are buying methylene blue on the internet. It's a really brilliant blue dye. It does have some pharmacologic properties, but people are taking it for things like anti-aging and cell oxidation reversers and things like that that don't really have a whole lot of evidence. But like we were saying before, blue is known to kind of be associated with stimulatory effects or relaxation. Maybe people do feel that way even though that chemical
Hmm.
isn't really doing anything in the body. Could all be
So they're just
psychological.
drinking the methylene blue. That's what they're doing.
I suppose so. Yeah. Whereas
That
I'm
is
just eating
that's
blue like
crazy.
number one. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Says the guy drinking
That's
blue
absolutely crazy.
Gatorade.
Yeah, sorry.
Well,
All right.
with that, I think we can say that dyes may not be completely harmless after all, but it is important to keep things in perspective since our patients will probably ask for dye-free items with undue alarm, right?
Yeah. Yep, agree. And it looks like our claim today, truth mostly wins with flying colors, but it's not 100% black and white when it comes to dyes.
No, I like that, Don. And it's a good practice to really view these extra ingredients as excipients. I really don't like the term inactive ingredients because, as we saw, they can have pharmacologic effects. And after all, the modern pharmaceutical industry, as a historical tidbit, was born from dye companies when you think about it.
Oh yeah, like Bayer and Sandoz. Yeah, interesting
Exactly.
point. Yep,
Very
yep.
true.
So when it comes to dyes, each product for the same med can be different, and it may not be obvious. So know where to spot dye content on labeling and look for dye-free alternatives if needed. Make note of the patient's allergy or intolerance in their profile. But keep in mind that some allergy warning software may not know an exact product dyes content to fire off that alert.
Yeah, technology, you got to be careful with. And another kind of last resort option I can think of is be ready to compound a medication if needed
Mm.
to avoid dyes completely. But you have to balance your risks, right? Because then that's making an unapproved med. So weigh those options there carefully.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. So, Steve, you know what? We actually got a message from our podcast that sent us a
Ooh,
text link from an audience member. We get excited about those when they come.
yes.
And they had this question, and it was kind of a
Mm,
big question because you have the expired meds, they just throw them away. Can they be of use to anybody, right? If they're slightly expired or whatever it may be.
good
So
point.
the answer actually, unfortunately, is no officially. Although as of 2024, 45 U.S. states have laws allowing drug donation for depository programs, and 20 have the active programs. But there's that rigid requirement, including expiration dates, being in dates or slightly expired. So it's important. People do want to help. They want to donate their medications. They're slightly expired. Kind of get the knowledge of the state programs and run with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in
Mm.
Iowa, where I'm currently broadcasting from, we have one of the largest donation programs in the US. And for us, I believe the drugs need to typically be
Mm.
donated at least 6 months or more before their
Right.
expiration date, because we don't want to have to deal with those expiration dates happening. So that's
Right.
a great
Right.
point. And if you'd
Right.
like to have your question about this episode answered next month, send us a message, please. We'd love to answer your questions about dyes. It's a very hot topic.
Yes. Uh, Second that. And also a couple more things here. If you liked what you heard on this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and review Rumor versus Truth wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, check us out on trchealthcare.com. You can also help grow our show by telling a friend about the awesome things you learned about and where you found us.
And definitely take a look at the show notes or description for this episode. We've linked directly to some of the great resources we mentioned today, like the article in our May 2025 issue, a pharmacist letter, pharmacy technician's letter, prescriber insights, and our hospital issues too. And we also have a link to our handy algorithm for investigating drug allergies and sensitivities, which you can use for dyes.
And if you aren't already a subscriber, don't miss out on these resources. Sign up today to stay ahead of with trusted insights and tools. We are an industry leading, non-biased source information and continuing education.
And also, we need your help compiling more rumors and truths to analyze. So please send us your ideas at trchealthcare.com/contact us, or use the contact us link at the bottom of your TRC Healthcare homepage, or send us a text, that button right from the podcast show notes.
And we know you've got great ideas for us to demystify. Do not miss our next episode. We will celebrate our 40th anniversary of Pharmacist Letter with a throwback to claims we investigated decades ago and see if they still hold up in the 2020s.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at that ancient history. So, thanks for joining us on Rumor versus Truth, your trusted source for facts, where we dissect the evidence behind risky rumors and reveal clinical truths. See you next time.